Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is a show in which my opinion has changed drastically over the course of its existence. Even before it came out, when it was Spider-Man freshman year, it was one of my most anticipated of Marvel's announced projects. The idea of seeing the origin story of Tom Holland's Spider-Man in animated form, seeing the 6 months before Civil War, which yes, you can't really do much, but still, I was very interested in seeing that. There is then also a 2-year gap to fill in between Homecoming and Infinity War, which would then be Spider-Man sophomore year and Spider-Man junior year. And in that time you could do a lot. And then Spider-Man senior year could take place after No Way Home, and there's going to be a lot to fill in there as well. However, the show then changed to Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Definitely a better title for a multi-season show, but with a concept I found less intriguing. The concept now is an alternate version of the MCU Spider-Man whose life took a bit of a different path. Then the trailer came out and I was disappointed to say the least, especially with the art style and animation. It's similar to What If, but with slightly more stylized designs that, while distinct, is also a bit odd looking depending on the character. I was really hoping either for a 2D animated series similar to a recent example being Creature Commandos, or even better, a series with the same animation style and especially the coloring of X-Men 97, just with a different art style. Initially, I really did not like the look of the show, and I think there are elements that I still do not like people's hands or the overall coloring, but I am blown away by how much the look of the series grew on me. The art style feels inspired by the 1960s Spider-Man comics, but the same going for a lot of the designs, and what really helped is how much better Spider-Man looked over the course of the season, going from a relatively ugly looking homemade suit, which is so much worse than the MCU version, to the sleek Future Foundation suit, to the beautiful classic. I mean, man, nothing beats the classic red, light blue, and black Spider-Man suit, and it fits the series art and animation style so well. The show had some generally interesting designs that I appreciated, like the very classic, less MCU-y and more comic book inspired designs given to the likes of Doctor Strange, Iron Man, Doc Ock, and kind of Daredevil, but Daredevil is more so MCU, and some unconventional designs that I felt worked, like Norman Osborn and the Scorpion, both fantastic characters in the series, who I'll get back to when I talk about characters. The action never really impressed me in the animation or ingenuity, but at the same time, nothing ever felt bad either. The one thing I will say is that there's some brutality in the latter half of the season that I really did not expect, but also did appreciate. Peter gets his shit rocked multiple times, and blood is spilled, which in a show with a lot of blood doesn't really mean much, but in a show like this, where I didn't expect there to be any blood, with this tone and general child-friendly vibe to it, the blood and the brutality has a real impact. You really feel the damage Peter takes, reminiscent of the Green Goblin Spider-Man fight from the first Spider-Man movie, not at all how I thought the action of the series would go. Since we're already talking about the visuals, and I guess this delves into music as well, I loved the intro. I say this every time I review a series, but I'm always disappointed when a series doesn't have a lengthy intro and theme, so even if the intro isn't great, if it exists, that's already a plus. And that was actually my initial opinion. Watching the first few episodes, or when it was released online before the show came out, this strange rap with odd-ish lyrics combining with the classic Spider-Man theme felt a bit ill-fitting, and it didn't help that the visuals of the series definitely had not grown on me yet. But then, something really weird happened. I kind of love this intro now. I got used to the art style, I started vibing to the music, and genuinely appreciating how well the classic theme is woven into the rap. But more than anything, I love it when an intro changes from episode to episode. In this series, the second half of the intro changes to represent the Spidey suit that he's wearing in that episode, and each episode's intro ends with a unique ending shot, like comic covers for individual issues. I love lengthy intros, I especially love lengthy intros with good songs and great visuals, but this intro combines all the best aspects of a good intro. It's lengthy as a good song, I like the visuals, and it's different depending on the episode. Give me more of this, please. I love it. Another thing that had to grow on me was this interpretation of Spider-Man and his supporting cast. I mean, the first 2 episodes really did not sell me on the series at all. In those 2 episodes, I found Peter to be a bit annoying and a bit flat. Episode 1 focused entirely on his crush on Pearl, which, given that she was his babysitter, feels a bit weird, but also, who the hell is Pearl Pagan? They got rid of his classic origin by killing Uncle Ben before he became Spider-Man, a decision I'm still not sure about because even after finishing the season, I'm not entirely sure what drives him to be Spider-Man. It also puts into question how this is meant to be a diverged MCU timeline, since Peter very clearly learned the responsibility lesson prior to Civil War, as there was an almost direct reference. Anyway, this greatly affected how I felt about Peter from the get-go, since he seems a bit too perfect. He already had his motivation from the get-go somehow, was courageous and heroic before getting bitten, generally gets along along with almost everyone in school, and on top of that is a genius who then gets physically very powerful. The season, however, does give him unique and non-traditional challenges, like being influenced by Norman Osborn, alongside some more traditional Spider-Man challenges, like someone close to him finding out his identity. These challenges were handled well and allowed for Peter to evolve into a bit more of a competent hero by the end, while also being a bit more multifaceted. And because of this, because I really liked the voice actor in the role, and because of how great he looks by the end, I did end up really enjoying this version of Spider-Man as a whole. But there are aspects of him that I think still are a bit missing. For instance, the great responsibility lesson. I do also hope that he stops wearing the glasses. I don't know, it feels wrong. The first two episodes introduced us to a lot of characters like Nick Minoru and Pearl Penguin, who come from non-Spider-Man sides of the Marvel Universe, and thus feel a bit out of place. These characters being introduced feel very CW-y, including characters completely unrelated to the main character into the supporting cast, with the possibility of them becoming superpowered down the line. In fact, Nico already is. Generally speaking, I am not a fan of this. I prefer they focus on Spider-Man characters. There is more than enough to pick from. Pearl could have been any number of Spider-Man love interest, and Nico could have been any number of Spider-Man supporting characters. Nico and Peter do have good platonic chemistry, so at least there's that. Pearl really offers nothing, as Peter's way older crush is a bit weird. As Alani's girlfriend, she's fine, I guess. This edition feels very unusual because she's like a female Namor in the comics. I mean, I've never heard of her, but it's just so out of place. What is she doing here? What also feels a bit CW-y is there being a Team Spider-Man being built, even including his arch enemy as the mentor type, just like the Flash. This I actually did enjoy. I found this adaptation of Norman to be really fun at the beginning and then a bit scary by the end. The voice fits really well. I like his rapport with Peter, and his very minimal but noticeable downfall felt natural to his persona. I especially love the twist on the classic line he told to Peter, that with great power there must also come great respect. It even sounds like he's about to say responsibility but says respect. It's a great twist on things that made for a compelling beat in the story and in how Peter incorporates it later on. The moment does kind of justify the change to Peter's origin. Not entirely, since I still don't know why he's as motivated as he is, but it is definitely something, and maybe they'll do more with it. As for Harry, I like his design less than I like Norman's design, and I don't think he feels as much like Harry, but I don't really mind that. I thought his friendship with Peter felt very naturally occurring and was more interesting than Peter's friendship with Nico. Harry and Nico also had a bit of a side adventure that helped both characters develop, but that definitely was also one of the weaker parts of the later half of the season. Everyone else at Oscorp absolutely sucks. These interns and the boss were all characterized as being weirdly mean and extremely unlikable, a very different way to show Peter being bullied, I guess, but they only ever come off as caricatures of very annoying characters rather than characters themselves. This is the biggest thing that I didn't like early on and never ended up liking. Thankfully, the season, and I thought they would, didn't give them much focus, and that's definitely a good thing. I hope they continue that way. As for Dr. Connors being gender bent, I am not a fan. I just don't like gender bending in general. I think gender is one of the most defining characteristics of each character, and that is certainly true for the Lizard, who is typically a father. Finally, for the main characters is Lonnie Lincoln, the one character who was compelling for the entire series from the first episode. From the moment he got focused, the series seemed to shift in tone a bit, with anything focusing on him having a darker tone, or maybe even a more mature rating. His descent into crime was truly compelling, being a tragic downfall with circumstance after circumstance pushing him down. But also at the same time, it feels like he enjoys this more than his normal life, and is choosing this one. Somehow, the series made me smile wildly when they gave him the Tombstone name, even though this is a villain that I never cared about or even liked. And then the same thing happened when he got doused in the chemicals that turned him into Tombstone, and then also when his skin began to peel off. Genuinely a fantastically told origin for an otherwise like D-tier Spider-Man villain, setting him up to have a potentially great role as either a main villain or a recurring villain with a personal connection to both Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and then also the audience. An absolutely fantastic arc from start to finish. The only thing I had issue with is how small each gang in the story was, each only being a handful of guys, and each also mostly without weapons. It feels weird to see gangs fighting each other with their fists, but accepting that this is a superhero world where guns do nothing to anyone aside from Uncle Ben, yeah, sure, I'll go with it. That gang's leader, Big Donovan, is the classic slums type gang leader, but also kind of makes me wonder about how connected the series is to the MCU, since his live action counterpart looks very different and, at least in the Netflix shows, was a lawyer working for the Kingpin. This brings up the point of the premise of the show. Apparently, this is meant to be a what if scenario, like an episode of What If given an entire series. A world felt similar to the MCU, except Peter was mentored by Norman Osborn instead of Tony Stark. This is shown in moments which I really liked, like remaking Peter's introduction in Civil War, but with Norman Osborn, both the Civil War and the Sokovia Accords playing into the story, and a black suit probably recently debuted Daredevil making a pretty fantastic short appearance. I actually love this scene, showcasing a slightly more lighthearted and acrobatic take on Daredevil, while keeping him very confident to the point of even defeating an inexperienced Spider-Man. Initially, the MCU Easter eggs and musical cues felt like cheap ways to pander to casual fans, and made me feel like the series lacked originality, but that's yet another thing that grew on me over time. I really enjoyed how they incorporated the Sokovia Accords, hearing the Daredevil theme was peak, Iron Man's cameo was really cool, and the general what if scenario was used in such a way that feels similar but also is wholly different. It kind of felt like the series is missing characters like MJ, Betty, Flash, Ned, and all the villains that Peter faced in the MCU, while the MCU is missing the Osborns, Doc Ock, Dr. Connors, and the symbiote. It's like these two versions of Spider-Man are two halves of one full Spider-Man world that, if combined, would form that full Spider-Man world. As it stands, I'm happy to enjoy both versions. Speaking of those villains, the one-off villains of this season weren't great, but the main ones definitely were. The ones I didn't care for like at all are Butane, Speed Demon, and Maria Vasquez, all of whom had boring minimal designs, had okay I guess personalities, and decent-ish fights with Peter. Unicorn also had a whatever design, but at least had some character, and then she also had connections to more notable Spider-Man villains like the Rhino and the Chameleon. I love how Chameleon looks modeled after his MCU counterpart, who never got to become the Chameleon, and in general I like the idea of this series doing that with a few of the MCU villains, for instance, the Scorpion. Matt Gargan, also looking similar to his unrealized MCU counterpart, is great. His design is a bit more minimal than I'd prefer, but his tail is a really uniquely used weapon, pushing the series into really brutal territory as he smacks Peter around with it. Scorpion comes off as a fittingly psychotic villain, the Michael Mando inspired accent adding a lot, and with his voice actor selling it really well. I especially love how he says Aranya. Aside from the minimal design, this is a pretty perfect adaptation of Scorpion, just a brutal psychopath reveling in violence and allowed to cut loose, offering the show its more brutal and intense moments, a well-developed rivalry with Spidey, and the connection to Lonnie's side of the story as well. Just a great adaptation of a Spider-Man villain. Gargan got his tail from Dr. Octopus, another pretty great adaptation with the design ripped from the comics, a very fun and unique personality, and very fitting voice. He's a bit more of a pathetic version of Otto, an egotistical genius inventor who can't think of anything to do with his genius other than make weapons for criminals, and he also has a sidekick that kind of has to do everything for him, with most mainstream Doc Ock showing him as a tragic figure losing his sanity. It is a bit refreshing to see one who just kind of sucks and always has and always will. The series followed a general story over the course of its season, which I'll always prefer over episodic formulas, at least when done well. Characters develop, stories unfold, and things lead into not just one, but two separate finales. The way the season led into Peter getting the classic suit was so satisfying, and especially seeing it in the intro, just mwah. Lonnie's gang story was what led into Scorpion, which the penultimate episode wrapped up perfectly. You can argue that Scorpion is the main villain of the season, despite not appearing in the finale, and if you do, then he's a pretty great one at that. Peter and Norman's relationship concludes in the finale as Norman's darker side comes to the surface, just a natural conclusion to their partnership and a beginning to what could become an arch enemy status. I liked Team Spidey, but I would not enjoy it if it continued past this season, because then it would really feel very CWE. I'd prefer for Spidey to work alone. Okay, never mind. That aside, the finale is pretty wild as it connects directly to the pilot. Sequences I hadn't mentioned up until this point, this here is the perfect manifestation of my evolving opinion on the show. Watching episode 1, I found the sequence to be genuinely pretty bad. Had I reviewed it back then, I probably would have given it like a 5 out of 10. I did not like the first episode. The Venom creature looked weird to me. Strange's quips felt way too MCU-y, but just like bad MCU dialogue. Peter being this courageous without powers feels odd, and what I thought was happening here was that this was the MCU Strange crossing dimensions, bringing a spider with him on accident, with that being the series' diverging point. The finale took this into an entirely different and wholly unexpected direction, and I loved it. For one, this is a very fun team up. Spidey and Strange have great chemistry, they look fantastic together, just really fun stuff. The timey-wimey time loop event is pulled off masterfully and in such a way that loops everything back around to make the first episode better than I initially thought it was. These sequences are also visually fantastic, from the Spider-Man suit to the colorful alternate dimensions, just really great stuff and a very unique finale. The penultimate episode was the finale to the season. This feels like a sequel to the opening of episode 1, and that is very unique. I don't know how, but everything just fell into place for me. The art style, the animation, the writing, none of the issues that made me almost write off the show from the first episode remain in the finale, and the finale also then makes the first episode better. The season gets better over time, leading into some satisfying conclusions and intriguing setup for a second season that I am very excited for. The series then ends with an insane reveal that I'm not sure how to feel about. Peter's dad, Richard Parker, who it seems like he thinks is dead, is alive and in prison. What? This is like a sequel to Uncle Ben dying before Peter becomes Spider-Man, a wild change to Peter's past involving his family that should have major ramifications. Peter's parents being focused on is never something that I've really cared much about. The Amazing Spider-Man movies attempted this and it didn't really work. The comics also have tried this a few times, and again, who cares? It's not important. Uncle Ben and Aunt May are Peter's parents. The twist is definitely intriguing because maybe they have an interesting idea. Maybe Richard will stand in for Uncle Ben in some way, or maybe connect to some unrevealed villain. But ultimately, it's not what I'm most anticipating in season 2. And I think it's just a shame that Uncle Ben's role was minimalized just like it was in the MCU. I mean, it's been told before, but I will never get sick of a classic Spider-Man origin story. I think the great responsibility lesson Peter learns and then Uncle Ben's role in that makes for one of, if not the single most powerful moment in a superhero origin like ever. And to completely remove it from Spider-Man feels wrong. With MCU Peter, it's at least implied. Here, it is confirmed that it did not happen. Anyway, all of that is to say that your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man took me on just like a whirlwind of differing opinions, from excitement to disappointment to indifference to disliking it to kind of liking it, and now excitement for season 2. It's not perfect, there are elements I don't like, things taken out that feel wrong, and the season took a few episodes to get going. But all in all, there are many more things that I did like or even love, and I think the season deserves credit for that, and I think it deserves an 8 out of 10. Just a great season of television, and who knows, maybe this will go down as this generation's version of The Spectacular Spider-Man, the last great Spider-Man series. Thanks so much for watching.